So maybe to start with, at the origin of the project. So this is to give you just the overall context. This was a project that we started in 2016, and at the time it was definitely one of the first, if not the first, sculpture project, so art project dealing with artificial intelligence in 2016. And the way it all started was actually a bit happenstance, where I was visiting the Venice Biennale, so the International Olympics of the Arts in Venice that happens every 2 years, in 2016, I believe, and ran across, met Mat coming out of an exhibition. I'm not sure why or how, but just started talking as we were waiting for other friends to join up or other colleagues to join up, and next thing I knew, 2 hours later, we were drinking limoncello on a terrace somewhere in Venice, and 2 years later, we were building by far the largest art exhibition that the Joliette, Musée d'Art de Joliette had ever built, with far-reaching implications in Europe and in North America. So Mat is an artist and he'll go more into this himself, but he's an artist who has often worked with science to try to explore different sides of science through visual arts. And he had done it in a number of previous projects. And I was, I think right after the second glass of limoncello, I thought, well, we should do something together one day. I think an art project, an exhibition should come out of this in Canada at one point or another. It took a little while to figure out how to make it happen and what was interesting. But at the time, it was the early beginnings of artificial intelligence in Montreal. And I thought, well, there's something happening in Montreal with this. Why don't I bring Mat over, have him meet a bunch of people from that community and see what comes out of it. So in 2017, probably, he came over for a week, and we had lined up a bunch of meetings with different companies and researchers working with artificial intelligence. And one of them was Jean-François Gagné from Element AI. And this is one of the first connection that happened, and that started the whole thing. So maybe I'll let you to talk more about the art, and I'll interject.
So basically, when I first arrived in Montreal in October 2017, I was involved in discussions with a group of people that were involved in the development of the Montreal Declaration of AI Ethics. We're having lots of sort of conversations around, building this kind of ethical framework, which at that moment in time really wasn't in place. Where I could, even as an outsider, I was kind of very aware of this kind of train just kind of rolling away, driven by, private enterprise, without sort of seeming to be kind of safeguarded with any kind of like sort of mutually agreed ethical codes. So I had some extraordinary meetings with like moral philosophers, scientists, AI, practitioners, and my journey really started after about 2 weeks. So I spent 2 weeks in Montreal, and then I decided that I needed to see the land. I needed to know where I am. So a lot of my kind of research as an artist over the years has been around looking at the relationship between humanity and the wider reality which we inhabit. A significant point or a turning point for me as an artist was a residency I did in 2015 in South Africa. I was working in a place called the Cradle of Humankind, which is one of the sites of the earliest controlled use of fire, controlled by human beings. And it became very, very clear how much of a role the land, the actual geology itself, and the ecosystem that the geology kind of created influenced early human evolution. So what I was looking at was they had these extraordinary kind of caves that gave early humans kind of shelter. There was a high iron content in the geology of the ground, which created significant kind of lightning strikes. So there were lots of bushfires. So people, early humans, our ancestors, encountered this kind of naturally occurring phenomena that enabled them to live longer because they could cook food, they could kill the pathogens in the food, and actually live longer. Living longer allowed them to more time for their kind of neurology to change in response to the kind of situation, the physiological situation they're experiencing. So in this instance, in Quebec, I found it really, really important to get out into the land and understand where I was. So I'm just going to pop onto the first. I don't know if you guys can see this, but so I actually, after all these meetings in Montreal, I actually went on a trip. I hired a pickup and I drove up to Labrador. And I suppose I was looking for, I was hunting in a way. I suppose I was like hunting a story, a narrative, something that, a thread, a conceptual thread that would enable me to develop a body of work. One of the first places I came to is the image on the left here. It's in Manicouagan in northern Quebec. And it's actually the site of a meteorite impact about 350 to 400 million years ago. A massive meteorite over 5 kilometers long struck Quebec, creating this extraordinary kind of, you know, when you drop a droplet of water or a stone in water, first it kind of comes up and then it sinks back down as the water droplet strikes.
And it wrinkles.
And it ripples out, yeah, exactly. And that is exactly what's happened here, but on a cosmic scale. And there was something about this kind of, this natural phenomena that really captivated my imagination. And I felt I felt like I had a starting point. I didn't know what I wanted to do with it, but it felt like there was this kind of starting point. And I was saying at this scientific research station on the edge of the lake, which is the impact crater from the meteorite impact. And they were all talking about this material. It's called impactite. And it's a type of stone that was created when this meteorite struck Quebec. So basically, as the meteorite struck, it liquefied the crust of the earth and it reformed as a completely different stone type. And I felt that there was something super important in this. I was also reading, I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Nick Bostrom's book, Superintelligence, which was scaring the living daylights out of me at that moment in time. You know, all the potential kind of outcomes of, you know, unframed AI kind of development. And I suppose I was feeling a kind of quite an apocalyptic mood. And, you know, I felt that there was something that resonated between this kind of global extinction event that was the meteorite impact, and potentially what could happen in the future with artificial intelligence. The second moment on that kind of trip up to Labrador was I discovered this amazing lighthouse, which a lot of you might be familiar with if you're from here. It's quite an iconic structure, the Phare de Haut-Font-Prince, which is just off the coast of Tadoussac, about 7 kilometers off the coast of Tadoussac, on the north shore of the Fleuve Saint-Laurent. And I came away from this kind of trip feeling like I'd sort of discovered these sort of seed ideas for the development of new work. While I was back in the UK, I got followed by this kind of snowstorm back to the UK, and I got snowed into my studio, which is a very, very rare event in the west of England. It's we grow palm trees there, and basically I had this incredibly vivid dream. I'd literally come off the plane, gone to bed, and I had this incredibly vivid dream which actually ended up being a narrative for the film you just watched an excerpt from. The film is called Le Rêve, like the dream, so it's based on this kind of dream. And it basically presents a man and a woman post AI becoming sentient, living in the lighthouse in the middle of the Fleuve Saint-Laurent, engaged in this kind of obsessive kind of activity of making these kind of clay objects with their hands in order to remember what it is to be human again. So AI is sort of said in the near future. AI has become sentient. And for me, in this dream, the kind of most profound thing that kind of came from it was that humans had lost the sense of meaning, the sense of meaning in their lives. That's what I came out with. So it ended up being a 10-minute film called Le Rêve, which I'll show you some images of later. But so then...
but maybe talk about what the reflection, like how you decided to work with AI. Like we understand that you're worried about the future of AI, like if it became sentient, what happens? But how? Because there's a process that happened with the material, the impactite, and trying to teach something to the AI that was, I think, really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think what it is you know, human beings have always kind of engaged with material reality using their hands. That's the primary interface. And the things we have kind of made with our hands have kind of shaped us in return. And I think I'm really interested in focusing on that kind of extraordinary timescale of human evolution that's led us to this moment right now, where we're potentially on the brink of kind of creating a form of intelligence that could supersede our own, which is an extraordinary idea. And I felt like I wanted to kind of like tie these kind of geological events to the moment now. I think that was the
and to the sense of touch, which is one of the early discussions that we had was the fact that, as you said, we know our environment through the sense of touch. I think it's even more so the case for a sculptor. I mean, your world makes sense because you shape things. You don't imagine them in 3D.
To find meaning.
Exactly. And it's when we started looking at AI, we realized that there was no, at the time in 2017, there was no AI in existence that properly worked with matter and with the 3D space, to the point that when we first spoke to Element AI about this, they said, well, this is fascinating. Like, there's no AI that does this. So maybe we could create one for your project that would understand and work with 3D space, that would fulfill your needs, but would also obviously answer their own need of like generating new forms of AI that things that previous forms didn't do.
So I think in that sense, I think it was kind of relatively groundbreaking at the time. I mean, we weren't aware of anyone that was sort of working, you know, with AI in that kind of way. So coming back to the images here, I mean, I just want to show some images of the kind of process that I went through to get to the point of making this kind of exhibition. So some images here. I've came back in February of 2018. And visited the Observatoire de l'Astroblème de Charlevoix. The second image you can see here is actually a 3D printed, extraordinary 3D printed map of a second meteorite impact, which happened in Charlevoix after the one in Manicouagan. And you can really see this extraordinary. You can see the mountains at the forming a ring, and the pinnacle, Mont les Éboulements, where the meteorite impacted. So we went down onto the Fleuve Saint-Laurent with Jean-Michel Gastonguay, who is a geologist who set up the observatoire. And we actually tried to identify some impactite, this material that was created when the meteorite struck. And this is him standing here with what's called a shatter cone. So when meteorites strike, they create these incredible stress fractures through the earth, through the rock, which create these amazing forms, really incredibly beautiful forms. So we managed to identify some impactite and kind of made a plan to try and harvest some of this impactite, to gather some of this impactite to use with the sculpture. At the same time, sort of a little bit later, spring, we managed to sort of set up this conversation with Concordia University, with their MFA students, who came out to Mont Saint-Hilaire, just outside Montreal, and we dug natural clay from the bed of a creek and processed it on site to end up with about half a ton of clay, which had been processed. So it was, plastic and a homogeneous material. And let's go to the next
and cleaned up.
slide.
But this, and maybe to contextualize, like all of this was happening because if we were to try to create an AI that understood 3D, and we were going to try to interrelate our sense of touch with the AI's sense of touch, with huge quotation marks, we needed matter to work with. We needed like concrete matter where the human would shape something that the AI could learn from, and that's how you decided to work with clay, thinking this is sort of the original matter, the first thing that humans shaped, and then that raised a bunch of questions as well. And maybe I'm going a little too fast or not, I don't know. You tell me. But there was at that time a lot of thinking about, well, what are we going to shape? Like, are we going to do a bunch of pots and give that to the AI and try to teach the AI how to do pots or not? And you decided on a different approach that I think was very, very interesting. But for that approach, we needed the clay. We needed something that was the original matter, like the simplest form of touch possible, that came 100% from the land. You did not want to buy clay because you thought, well, if you go into the manufactured process, then there are robots involved and machines involved, and already you're like talking about something that is somewhat less human. So the getting the original clay by people,
this real
that
kind of primary material,
hand cleaning it, hand preparing it, to hand fashion it, so that the sense of touch done by the human that would later serve as the teaching material for the AI was 100% or as much as possible natural.
We switch on to that. So then in May 2018. We teamed up with Element AI, Jean-François Gagné and Element AI, and I sort of designed this kind of furniture for this kind of space at an event called C2, which is a international technology conference that happens in Montreal every couple of years, and basically. The clay was, as you can see, was put on the plinth at the end. We had a in situ digital scanning booth, and this kind of archival storage kind of racking.
Behind this whole thing, like when we created this setup at C2, we thought, well, if we want humans to shape something, you need huge data sets for AIs to learn anything. So we needed a lot of humans to produce a lot of things. And we thought if it's him and I just shaping clay for the next 6 months, we won't even get there. So I reached out to Jean-François from C2, the founder of C2, and then we thought, well, they get a lot of people, and this will have an interesting technological result in the end. So why don't we bring something to these thousands of people that are going to be in that space for 3 days and ask them to contribute to the project? So the whole space there was imagined as a space where individuals could go and work with the clay, and they could dry on those shelves that you've designed. And then there was a scanning station so that we could, because obviously for the AI to learn, you can't give it the clay. Like the AI needs a virtual file to learn from, or some virtual data set.
So if you skip on to the next one.
Is that where you are?
Yeah, there should be.
Oh, there you are.
You can see that. So in fact, on the left there, you can see visitors coming in, pulling a clump of clay from the raw mass, and simply just squeezing it. It's just taking that imprint of the hand. It's a very, very primary gesture, and then each individual clay print was given to a group of assistants who then archived it. They stamped it, numbered it, and then digitally scanned it in situ. I don't know how many of you know about digital scanning process. Basically, the way scanning works, it maps the surface of any form in a series of kind of tessellating triangles which form a kind of mesh which describes the 3D physical structure. So basically, we were collecting, as you can see, these wonderful blocks of kind of impactite from Charlevoix, and they were shipped to Lac Mégantic, where they were going to be worked with robotic milling technology. The two images on the right, you can see them being three-dimensionally scanned. At the same time, Jean-François Gagné and his team at Element AI were developing this machine learning program. And I mean, I do very clearly remember, you know, being, I think it was at the Musée, actually, there was a dinner at the Musée, and sitting, and Jean-François Gagné, like, explaining to me literally on the back of a napkin, you know, as well,
how AI works.
Like, sort of how an AI works, and just breaking it down into the simplest form. And that for me was a really kind of important moment. And actually, I saw from that moment the need for this kind of fragmented kind of structure in the kind of sculpture, which you'll kind of see in a minute as we progress through the slides. So the AI was being was developed, and all of the scans of the hand imprints. There were 1,480 individual hand imprints, which were the scan data was fed into the artificial intelligence, which then, you know, machine learning basically learned to understand what a human being does when they squeeze a ball of clay. And then the instruction was kind of given to the AI to output its own hand imprint, which, as far as we know, has never been, you know, never.
It took a long time. I mean, the whole thing was done a bit rushed also because we had an exhibition date that we needed to be ready for, and they needed to, Element AI had to rework that AI. At one point, they had dozens of programmers working on it to try to make it happen. And even when it was produced, when the AI was functioning, the first outputs that came out were nothing that resembled a handprint into clay. Yeah. So there was some tweaking around to make it understand the mechanics of the resistance of the material, the mechanics of the hand. Some stuff as simple as, like, there are 5 fingers pressing into this material here, and this material will react this way depending on how much pressure you apply. But it did learn all that on its own through going through the data set, and then it started producing its own handprints.
So this is actually the first moment when it felt like a human handprint. Interestingly, though, it only has 3 fingers, which I think is quite possibly significant.
But our thinking since the beginning was to then use a 7-axis CNC machine to sculpt the impactite that we had collected from Charlevoix. Tons of impactite, and then we're speeding through the hassles related, the problems related to it. But you can imagine that getting that basically star rock out of Charlevoix into Mégantic to get it sculpted by this robot and then shipped to the museum to produce the exhibition was extremely difficult, and had problems throughout the whole thing. And surprisingly, and this is perhaps what we're going to come to at the end, but I would say that 95% of the problems that we faced in trying to produce this project were machine-based. The humans performed exceptionally well, but every single machine that we interacted in trying to make this happen usually resulted in one problem or another.
So these images here, you can actually see the 7-axis robotic milling machine cutting the form that you saw previously, the AI-created hand imprint, cutting segments of it into blocks of impactite. which is an incredibly labor-intensive process. You know, it's a long, slow process. But you know, you can see the sculpture being assembled at the end here. And then if we flick onto the next slide. So this is there's just a couple of images. This is shooting the film Le Rêve at the Phare de Haut-Prince.
But that was dealing a lot with the mechanics of artificial intelligence and its limitations. And at the same time, as we were producing that, you were producing as well the film that went more into the philosophical aspect of AI. Like, what are we doing with this new creature that we're inventing, and what is it going to result in? The film was not any easier to shoot because, of course, he picked a destination that was 7 hours away from Montreal, in the middle of the St. Lawrence River, and he wanted a Hollywood crew out there filming this lighthouse, which we figured out how to make happen. But after many attempts and a lot of other hurdles.
That's just a grab of the English and French versions of the film being recorded. And if we zip on to the next one. And this is, so now we're on to images of the exhibition as it finally kind of happened. So this is an installation image of Le Rêve being presented. It's a 10-minute, 40-second film with a narrative dialogue that, as I said before, talks about this kind of, is set in the near future with this man and woman engaged in this kind of compulsive act of kind of making in order to remember what it is to be human, you know, whilst living in this lighthouse after AI has become kind of sentient.
One of the beauties of the film, I think, is that, well, one, it's a single take scene, so it's literally the camera goes around in circles around the fort, and
one full circle,
and it's one full circle, and there are no breaks, there's nothing. It's just the camera on a boat slowly going around. You don't see the boat, you don't see humans at all. You just see the sun rising, because of course you had to do this at 5 o'clock in the morning, but you slowly see the sun rising on the horizon, and you're focusing on the lighthouse. And the movie being 10 minutes. It starts, one of the wonderful things, I think, is that it starts and you don't know what you're looking at, you don't know who's talking, you don't know what they're talking about. And slowly pieces come together and you realize that the guy who's talking is probably living on the lighthouse. It's probably some 10 or 20 or 30 years in the future. And then halfway through the film you realize, all right, now we have a sentient AI that has changed the world. What does that do? How did it happen? You don't know how it happened, but you know what it did. And the voiceover tells you how life is different now, how it was previous to zero, zero being the name of the sentient AI, how it was before zero and how it is after zero. But it happens very slowly and very subtly in a very poetic fashion. That was, that echoes the philosophical aspect of this film versus the mechanical aspect of the installation. That is the next picture. Should I switch?
It absolutely is. Yeah, let's go. So this is migration. So this is presented on, as you can see, an enormous plinth. You've got the 1,480 hand imprints arrayed in a grid with the AI produced hand imprint cut into impactite, this meteoric fused stone, presented at the end. And this actually was presented first at the Musée d'Art de Joliette and then toured after that to Arsenal Art Contemporain in Montreal as well. Yeah. And if you zip onto the next slide.
And there was a third component to the exhibitions, which was drawings. So in both venues, you had the central plinth, and around it there was a pair or a few pairs of drawings, depending on the layout and the setup of these amazing drawings that you produced.
So yeah, so these drawings, they're all, the title for the show is Migrations. I'm really interested in that kind of idea of, the migration of consciousness in a way, and how consciousness can actually kind of transcend material boundaries. And will probably in the future, even more so. And really interested in that so basically, these drawings, they take a migratory bird species that's indigenous to Quebec. And I've drawn, as you can see, they're paired drawings. I've drawn the right-hand side of the drawing with my left hand, and the left-hand side of my drawing with my right hand. And the idea with that is, basically these migratory species travel from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere every year. Using my left hand and my right hand, when I use my right hand, right hand, it's the left hand side of my brain that's controlling it, and vice versa. And there's this kind of migration of consciousness across the hemispheres of my own brain that kind of mirrors the migration in these indigenous bird species. So I wanted to kind of set up a kind of a kind of relationship between the internal and external kind of realities that we kind of inhabit. So we've got a barn swallow on the left. We've got there's a ruby-throated hummingbird on the right here. And if we zip onto the next,
one of the things that you don't get from these pictures also is a sense of scale. These drawings are about 1.5 meters tall.
There you get another installation detail of the sculpture, and you can see the drawings exhibited at the back in these kind of pairs. This is a drawing, again, made with left hand and right hand, drawn from the surface of the water at the Fleuve Saint-Laurent. There's another little detail of the migration installation, detail of the hand imprints. You can see them arrayed in the grid. You can see the material texture of the migration sculpture. One of the important things for me was to leave on the milling pathways that the robot had kind of taken as it cut into the stone, as this kind of memory of this kind of machine process. So ultimately, that object really was fabricated. It was untouched by human hand in its fabrication, and I wanted to kind of leave a kind of memory of that in the kind of in the stone. This kind of robotic process.
The overall installation, and then subsequent drawings.
Yeah. So that was migration. I think
we're over.
One of the things that I feel is motivating me as an artist, and in my thinking as a maker, is that idea of actually how in control are we of the technologies that we create. And I think I just want to kind of touch on, because we're running out of time a little bit here, the notion that 80% of the kind of serotonin that's produced in our body. This is the mood enhancing chemical neurotransmitter that sort of defines how we experience appetite, sleep, happiness, sexual desire. This extraordinarily important chemical neurotransmitter is produced by our microbiome, the gut flora in our microbiome. And there are more living beings in our gut than there are cells in our own body. And one of the things that I kind of question as an artist, I'm really interested in as an artist, is who's driving this? Who is actually driving this kind of evolution that we're kind of part of? And I think this kind of the microbiome idea is a very, very interesting one, in the sense that it makes me feel like that we are the vehicles, that we are being driven by something other, and other beings that are kind of contained within our kind of ecosystem. And I think that's a very, very interesting idea. Also in relation to technology, who is driving this kind of technology? I think it's very difficult to give you a kind of sense without experiencing the works in real life that were in the show. That I feel this kind of sense of this kind of evolutionary wave moving through us with the technologies that were created, this evolutionary wave moving through us, that we really have no power or no control over. it's happening at us, it's happening to us, it feels to me. It's happening through us. One of the things that I'm moving into the future as an artist, that's one of the questions I'm really, really interested in sort of interrogating. To what extent are we in control of the kind of technologies that we're creating?